Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us for this National Conference of State Legislatures webinar, Energy You Can Count On, State and Federal Efforts to Enhance Energy Resilience. My name is Dan Shea. I'm a Senior Policy Specialist in NCSL's Energy Program, and I will be your moderator. This is the first webinar in the Natural Resources and Infrastructure Committee's 2021 Spring Webinar Series. We have a total of 5 webinars lined up over the course of the next few weeks. These include a look at the workforce challenges facing our nation's agriculture sector, distracted driving laws, and the latest on how emerging data and technology can help reduce the problem. State and federal policies that maximize opportunities for outdoor recreation, and an exploration of the most common threats to energy systems and the ways state and federal governments, along with the energy industry, are responding. For a complete schedule and registration details, please visit our website at ncsl.org. But if you're going to have to wait for all that, because today we're focusing on energy resilience. It's a very front of mind topic following the recent grid failures in Texas and other parts of the country, although these issues are by no means limited to those areas or those events. The 2010s were by far the most destructive decade since NOAA began tracking these issues and classifying billion-dollar disasters in 1980. That's both in terms of the number of events and the cumulative cost of damages. And we're not talking about thin margins. For a bit of context, from 1980 to 2009, the US averaged just under 5 of these billion-dollar disasters every year. In the 2010s, we saw an average of nearly 12 of these events annually. And the total damages went from an average of around 13 billion each year over that same time frame to averaging around 106 billion annually during the 2010s. Hurricanes, wildfires, tornadoes, polar vortexes, all of these represent substantial and unique threats to the nation's energy infrastructure. States have been working to soften the blow from these events. At NCSL, we've seen an increase in legislation over the past several years. Often these focus on enhanced system planning requirements, cost recovery for grid hardening, or facilitating resilient technologies and systems, such as microgrids. Similarly, the federal government has been working to support state and industry efforts to enhance resilience. The U.S. Department of Energy has 2 offices working on the issue, both its Office of Electricity and its Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response. Today, we have 3 speakers who are all well positioned to discuss these issues, and I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. But before I introduce our speakers, I need to review a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is a platform for information exchange and engagement. Over the next 60 minutes, we encourage participation through our chat, so feel free to type your questions and answer any questions using the chat function on your screen. If you'd like to, please go ahead and locate the chat and let us know who you are and which state you're from. I'm sure a number of you know each other, so go ahead and say hi. We will also draw questions from the chat for our Q&A, which will take place after our final presentation. The webinar today is being recorded, and registrants will be able to access recording and presentation slides on NCSL's website after the webinar completes. We will send out a notice once those resources are available. Okay, so back to business. Today, joining us, we have, Peter Larson, a staff scientist and deputy leader in the Electricity Markets and Policy Department at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. We have Darlene Phillips, the Executive Director for Operations and Engineering Support at PJM Interconnection, and Aram Benjamin, the CEO of Colorado Springs Utilities. Peter is going to kick things off for us. I mentioned the figure of how much the cost of responding to and recovering from these disasters has gone up in recent years. Peter's work focuses on looking at electric reliability and resilience through an economic lens, and so I'm really interested and excited to get his perspective on this. Okay, so Peter, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much for the introduction. I want to say thank you to NCSL for allowing me to speak with you today, and also to the Department of Energy Office of Electricity, who has funded a lot of our work, at least our national lab's work in this space. And so the title of my talk today is on valuing power system resilience in practice and policy. I'm going to be largely reporting on a manuscript that we released a couple of months ago, and I think it's a very timely study for the topic at hand. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be focusing on this report. There's a screenshot on the right-hand side. It's called Case Studies of the Economic Impacts of Power Interruptions and Damage to Electricity System Infrastructure from Extreme Events. And I'm really going to be talking about how utilities think about economic information when they're recovering from a past disaster, and how they use economics information to plan for future natural hazards or natural disasters. And like I mentioned a second ago, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about here, the majority of it is based on what we put out in this report to the right. But I am going to touch on a couple of other subjects towards the end of my slides. Next slide, please. So why did we undertake this study? Well, as Daniel pointed out at the onset of the call today, these natural disasters are increasing in frequency and duration. Obviously, what happened in Texas is front and center in a lot of people's minds, and we've been focusing a lot of work on putting economic information out there about how long duration, widespread power interruptions impact customers and the broader economy. And there's a growing need for this type of information about how you calculate the economic impacts of long duration, widespread power interruptions. And furthermore, once you have those economic impacts of long duration, widespread power interruptions, you can start to put these into a framework for evaluating, in some cases, major investments to mitigate the impacts of these types of power outages. Next slide. So this particular study, we had a couple of motivating questions that I think are really helpful to lay out up front here. First, we wanted to know, how are utilities assessing the costs of damage to their system and the costs of recovering from this damage? Are they estimating customer costs from past power interruptions? Is there information out there about that? How are they thinking about estimating the costs and benefits of investments to reduce power system vulnerabilities in the future? And are they using this concept of resilience? The concept of power system resilience has been, a big buzzword for a number of years now. It's different in some ways than the term reliability that, utilities have thought about extensively in the past. And then finally, how are regulatory processes influenced by utility economic analysis related to power interruptions? And so these are some of the questions that we explored in this study. Next slide. So this was a case study-based report, and we focused on 6 different natural disasters. We started out west, San Diego Gas and Electric, maybe 10 years or so ago, had a pretty major fire. And so we wanted to know, how is San Diego Gas and Electric thinking about, damage from the wildfire, and how are they using economic information to try to offset fire risk in the future? We also looked at a couple of utilities in Texas following hurricanes. This wasn't the paper came out before the major power outage in Texas, but it really focused on hurricane impacts in Texas. Florida Power and Light, same thing. We focused on hurricanes there. And Maryland, New Hampshire, and New York, we looked at a derecho wind event, ice storms, and Hurricane Sandy. And we tried to pick a wide range of different utilities that face different types of natural hazards. Next slide. So here are the exact natural disasters that we looked through the regulatory record on to learn about how economic information is used to recover from past events, but also plan for the future. We collected all of our information for this study by reviewing state public utility commission websites, their regulatory archives. We also included reports by other government agencies, including state governments. And then we reviewed the academic literature to see what was out there. Next slide. So if any of you out there have looked at consumer reports in the past, we try to follow that model. It's a nice way of communicating complicated information in an easily digestible way. And so what I'm about to show you has kind of a consumer reports feel. If you see an empty circle, that means there's little or no publicly available information out there. If it's a half circle, it means there's some amount of public information out there. And then if there's a full circle, that means there's a lot of information out there for the public. And we're really focused on economics information related to cost recovery, the costs to the transmission, distribution, or generation system. Maybe it's a damaged transmission line because of a hurricane. What information is out there in terms of economics information associated with cost recovery? On the other side of the slide here, we also wanted to know, is there economic information related to mitigating future power outage impacts? These could be things like avoiding customer interruption costs. So if a customer is without power, if you're able to avoid that because you put up a hardened steel pole, transmission tower, or you undergrounded lines, did the utility use some of these measures or regional economic impact measures to justify future investments in power system resilience? Next slide. So this is the table that shows our results for the availability of economic information related to cost recovery. So a natural disaster happened, and you've got the natural disasters here. And what information's out there in the public domain? And it turns out that utilities have a pretty good handle on this. They know what is damaged and how much it costs. And so you see these full circles for Florida Power and Light. That means there's a lot of information out there about damage to the utility system. Or in some cases, increased customer service costs. You're having to deal with, a bunch of customer service issues if you're without power for a long duration. And so you see a pretty good, there's pretty good coverage. San Diego Gas and Electric's a little thin, and that's because there wasn't as much damage to their system, but there was damage to, customers' property. And so that's sort of the unique situation in the San Diego Gas and Electric service territory. Next slide. This table, in some ways, is more interesting. And this is the availability of economic information related to mitigating future impacts. So if you're thinking about making your power system more resilient, is there information out there trying to justify these types of investments? And is there economics information? And it turns out that the only economic information that's really out there in the public domain is, in some cases, there's avoided customer interruption costs that the utility is telling us about. But in most cases, there's very little information out there that from an economic sense is trying to justify these future investments. If you look at the furthest two columns out, we've got cost effectiveness analysis and cost benefit analysis. This is whether the utility was actually conducting a cost effectiveness or cost benefit analysis to justify a future investment to avoid future risk. And so in many cases, in every case, utilities were doing cost effectiveness analysis, which is basically costs divided by some non-monetary value, like lives saved or something like that, versus cost benefit analysis where only 2/3 of them actually conducted a cost benefit analysis. But again, the take home here is if they're trying to justify future investments in resilience, there's not a lot of information out there. Next slide. So some of our key findings, and I'm not going to read all of these word for word, but utilities basically have a really good sense of what infrastructure was damaged during a natural disaster and how much it costs. Sometimes utilities do estimate customer costs of past power interruptions, but they don't always talk about the dollar value. They just say, X number of customers were impacted by the power outage for this long. And in not all cases are they actually attempting to put a dollar value on that. Our Berkeley lab leads the development of a tool called the Interruption Cost Estimate Calculator, which allows you to estimate the costs of shorter duration power interruptions. But there's not any evidence or very little evidence in the public domain that utilities are trying to put a economic impact on longer duration widespread power interruptions. And that's a really important measure if you're trying to justify a major investment. Next slide. Turns out that the term resilience is thrown around a number of times. And what we found is it's only unique in the sense that resilience, quote unquote, resilience investments tend to just be larger investments than what you would think of in terms of a typical reliability investment. So a reliability investment might involve putting in smart meters and switches and things to try to respond to outages. These are bread and butter types of investments utilities have been arguing for in front of regulators and policymakers for decades. It turns out that if you're trying to make major investments in power system resilience, they just tend to be larger investments in terms of dollar values. And one of the things that we found is that laws, and this is particularly important for this group, laws, regulations, and other practices can significantly influence utilities' preparation for and response to these big power outages. And in the case of cutting edge utilities and states that are thinking about this issue, the ones that have been the most successful are the ones that are developing these tools through a collective decision-making process with a number of stakeholders, including universities and research institutions. Next slide. So what are some policy recommendations that came out of this work? Well, first, it's really important to collect information on past natural hazards and how it impacts the power system. Not only collect it, do it in a consistent and comprehensive way, and then make it publicly available. The second, and this is a major focus of our work, so this statement is a little bit self-serving, I'll tell you that straight up, is support economic analysis into avoiding costs of long duration widespread power interruptions. We don't have a good handle on how much these big power outages cost customers. And so supporting new economic analysis into that type of work has important implications for justifying future investments. And then also supporting research that identifies some barriers and solutions to ensure this type of information is actually used in planning and procurement decisions by utilities and states. And then the fourth, I'm going to talk about this here in a second. We're developing the second version of the ICE calculator. This is the tool to estimate the costs of power outages. And so we're encouraging regulators and utilities to join a major national initiative to update the ICE calculator, because the ICE calculator is being used to justify some investments in reliability and resilience across the country. Next slide. So the ICE calculator 2.0 initiative this is the idea that the customer costs of power interruptions are of increasing importance for prioritizing utility investments. Berkeley Lab, we have developed the only publicly available tool to estimate the costs of power outages, and it's been used by a number of different regulators and policymakers and utilities to justify future investments. Next slide. However, the ICE calculator is becoming dated. Some of the data that is behind, it's based on customer surveys of outage costs. Some of the data is getting to be 20 plus years old, and it's not necessarily representative of the entire country. And so the Department of Energy and Edison Electric Institute are behind Berkeley Lab in standing up a national initiative to update this ICE calculator. And so if there's any interest from your constituents or your utility partners or regulators in joining this initiative, please feel free to contact me. Here's my email address. And that's it for my presentation. I think there's one last slide that just has contact information again for me, but also has a link to our website where you can find all of our reports on this topic. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Peter. That really was a fascinating study you've outlined, and it sounds like there's a lot of work taking place to help develop the metrics that could help utilities and regulators assess the value of resilient projects. So we are now going to hear from Darlene Phillips. Darlene is going to give us the grid operator and market perspective. Darlene is PJM's Executive Director for Operations Engineering Support, where she leads the energy management system technology, transmission services, and real-time data management in support of control room operations. She also worked for MISO for a number of years, so she knows these issues very well. I know PJM has been working hard on these topics recently, and so I can't wait to hear what she has to say. It's all yours, Darlene.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're coming
okay.
clear.
Perfect. So I will go ahead and get started. So I only have a short time, so I want to hurry up and get through the presentation so you'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. So while this presentation is not focused solely on the winter operations and how we fared through the cold weather event, I will use some of that information just to kind of bring home some of the points on some of the things that we are working on at PJM and that might be beneficial to you. Next slide, please. So in general, PJM performed well through the 2021 cold weather event. And, we are in a scenario where we have a robust transmission grid. We have, a great deal of fuel diversity in our region. And, several years ago, as other events happened, we put things into place, other incentives in place to assure that capacity was there when we needed to incentivize certain behaviors. So we did okay. Now, having said that, we understand that there's certainly more to do, and the success we have today doesn't necessarily translate into success in the future, given some of the industry trends that we are seeing. From a resilience perspective, Peter did mention it's beyond reliability, and we believe that too. So it is preparing for and operating through and recovering from these events that pose operational risks. And they include those high impact, low frequency events that Peter alluded to. And I want to stress, these are things that are not typically addressed today with reliability standards. And finally, I think through the lessons learned efforts that we're doing, as well as other activities, this will certainly help drive a more resilient grid in the future, certainly with respect to some of the extreme weather events that we've seen in the past. Next slide, please. So this slide is really just to give those who are unfamiliar with PJM just a snapshot of where we exist within the Eastern Interconnect. The one thing that I think is important is to really appreciate the dependencies that we have on each of the states, as well as the dependencies that we have across the, up into Canada. The other thing to note that might be helpful from a policymaker perspective, given these dependencies, that one thing that would be helpful is for policymakers and industry groups such as NCSL to maybe coordinate on some of the big questions that we have around resilience, and maybe have forums where there are opportunities for lessons learned activities, so that we all don't have to learn the same lessons, but that we learn from each other and put policies in place to help mitigate some of these extreme scenarios and extreme events. Next slide, please. So this slide is really meant to illustrate the massive amounts of electricity that we were exporting out of the PJM region during the cold weather event. And what this demonstrates is how important the transmission grid is in the discussion of having a robust resilience platform. We were exporting up to almost 16,000 megawatts of electricity, and you can see from this graph that our average is around the 6,000, 7,000 megawatt range. So this was an enormous amount of electricity that we were exporting. From a policy perspective, one of the things that's important here is to understand the importance of regional and coordinating through regional planning processes. So one of the things that you can consider as a policymaker, really understanding the importance of the transmission grid as a backbone, is how important it is to help drive and to put policies in place that help to deliver on some of these larger projects over time. Next slide, please. So this slide is really demonstrating, I know it looks on its face a little more complicated than it actually is, but if you focus on the numbers in the middle, what you see is the fuel mix at the time of during the morning and the evening peaks of the time period between February 15th and 19th during that cold weather event. What this demonstrates for us is that we had a pretty good mix of gas, nuclear, and coal on the system, and a very low penetration of renewables, which is about average for PJM. What it also demonstrates for PJM and brings to light is that, we are heavily dependent on gas. So when you're thinking about a robust program or a robust solution that would drive toward resilience, you have to consider those dependencies, whether it's gas, whether it is the water infrastructure, whether it's the communication platform. All of those areas are necessary in making sure that we have a robust system, because as you know, people say it often that, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So from a policy perspective, what this might provide to those who are in position to make such decisions is, what standards or what policies might we be able to put into place in order to assure that gas is available during times of emergencies? What do those priorities look like today, and what should they look like in the future, given some of our history with the extreme events? One of the things that PJM is focused on is really escalating these questions. So when it comes to those dependent or interdependent, industries, we are asking those questions, whether it's the gas industry, the communications industry, or the water industry. Next slide, please. So you saw on the previous graph the level, the 6% of renewables that we were generating during our winter peaks. This is really meant to show that the action that ones take with respect to resilience is really, really dependent on the current disposition of an area, whether you're talking about a region or whether you're talking about a specific state. If you want to take a holistic approach, you have to recognize those differences. So, for example, we know that in the PJM footprint, that the penetration of renewables are not as high as other areas. So, I would expect a state such as California, for example, or the California ISO, to be thinking about or prioritizing actions that are different than the PJM region, because we just have a different disposition with respect to the renewable portfolio. But it's not just limited to renewable portfolios. It could be anything. It could be the transmission system or whatever that is. So the main point here is just recognizing that you have to start with where you are in order to determine where, what actions might be a priority. And it's not going to be a one size fit all for everyone. I was listening to Peter talk through some of the benefits and some of the calculations and costs and analysis to kind of get at the cost or the benefits of these different projects. That will vary by region, certainly depending on the disposition of each area. So we got to take each area as it is. So from a policymaker, I think the biggest takeaway is just it's important to understand where you are in order to listen to the information that you are being given, and then make the priorities and decisions on what you want to focus on and what you want to pay for it. Next slide, please. I am not going to go through all of these actions. What I really wanted to point out in this slide is really to give folks a general understanding of all the activities that we do at PJM heading into the winter. And I'm sure this is not unique to PJM. I'm sure all of the other ISOs and RTOs and regional entities do this as well. But you see, we have a host of studies and data requests that we make. We coordinate heavily both with our neighbors, we coordinate heavily with reliability entities, and then we coordinate a lot with our gas industry, really trying to understand our disposition heading into the winter months so that we are better prepared should we have an emergency scenario. Next slide, please. So I want to spend a little more time on this slide because this really is where the rubber hits the road in kind of looking at events that have occurred and thinking through our lessons learned and how to move forward with planning for a more resilient grid. Um, so the first bullet is around reviewing existing cold weather preparedness activities. You saw on the previous slide just a list of all of the things that we do. The question that we're asking ourselves is, in light of what we experienced or what we saw others experience during this cold weather event, are there other questions we should be asking during these during the requests or during these surveys? The other thing that we're considering is, these are voluntary surveys and voluntary cold weather checklists. Should they be mandatory, going forward? So those are some of the questions with respect to preparedness. On the next bullet with respect to low temperature operating limits, this is another survey that we do heading into the winter. We do a survey to try to understand for all of our generating resources in our footprint, what are your operating limits? This question is really taking it to the next level. If we're talking about extreme scenarios, then the question is, how low can you go? So what might the temperature be whereby you experience issues with your generation resource, either starting or running? So we're trying to get to that extreme scenario with the next bullet point. Then we want to review existing processes and procedures specifically related to load shedding. We know that the EDCs and other entities within our footprint have their load shedding plans. So, we have three major questions kind of coming out of what we saw happening in ERCOT and other areas with respect to load shedding. The first is a question around what are your rotating procedures? So when we issue these type of requests for load shed, what are your procedures for rotating that load shed? The second question is around understanding how much of a request is too big whereby you are unable to rotate load shedding. So that's another question we want to understand fully. And then the third question is a really important one, which is really understanding the critical load lists that are included in the load shed plans. Does that critical load list also include gas processing and production facilities? The last thing we want to do is have enter a load shedding event and we shed load to gas facilities or production or processing facilities that are supplying gas to our generating resources that we actually need. And so really trying to make sure that we understand that so that we don't get into those scenarios as well. The next bullet point is really stepping up our effort to support potential future NERC standards around generation winterization. A lot of folks in a lot of generating facilities in our footprint now do perform winterization, have these winterization process and procedures. The question is, should it be a NERC standard whereby everyone is required to adhere to a certain level of standards when it comes to making sure that resources are prepared during the winter months. And then the last thing on this list is really around more coordinating with the gas industry. I can't stress enough how much we coordinate with our peers in this industry. This specific bullet, though, is really focused on understanding their weatherization practices and minimum critical temperatures, and really, understanding that so that maybe there's some suggestions that we can make that might help in that area as well. And from a policymaker perspective, maybe offering up some suggestions in that area. Again, I noted that we are only as strong as our weakest link, so we definitely want to make sure that when we're thinking about resilience, we're taking a holistic look at the industry and all of the dependencies that we have, and making sure that we are making sure that we don't have that weakest link in our footprint. That's all I had for you today. So I am looking forward to the questions that you may have.
Thank you, Darlene. I'm going to keep you on for just 1 second because we do have one question. One of our attendees is curious about why the wind generation fell this past year and whether there's a good explanation for that.
Well, that's a loaded question. It's interesting because we had I can't answer it fully. We don't have as much wind as some of the areas, but one of the things that we did here, we were lucky in that our forced outage rate in the PJM footprint during that time frame was about 8%. As compared to like the 22% during the polar vortex. Also note that, entities like MISO and ERCOT and others experience 40+% in some instances of forced outage rate, and that included some in the wind. What's interesting about this calculation is that it only counts, when you're talking about that period of time, it only counts what tripped during that period of time. It doesn't necessarily consider what may have tripped beforehand because of the, when it first started getting cold. So I can't answer that question. We understand that the wind resources in some areas are winterized, but I think some of the NERC and FERC lessons learned and recommendations coming out will give us the full answer around that.
All right. Well, thank you again for that presentation. That was great, and especially touching on the sort of electric gas and clearly that was a huge issue coming out of Texas as well. So thank you, and look forward to the Q&A. So now I just want to give a quick reminder to please use the chat if you do have a question. There's no need to wait, just pop any question you have into the chat now, and it helps us plan for the Q&A in a little bit. Our final presentation will come, our final presentation will come from Aram Benyamin, who will give us the utility perspective on resiliency planning and investment. Aram has been with Colorado Springs Utilities since 2015 and has been CEO since 2018. Prior to joining CSU, he worked as the head of the power system at the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Aram, if you want to turn on your video and your microphone, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniel. So thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having us on this panel. I'll start with, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm hoping to have a conversation and just a straight talk about some of the issues that are common to all of us in the industry. So I'll start with, I'm going to talk about the three topics that was outlined here. Is the first is the threats, and second is the regional grid operations and lessons learned from all these events that we've lived through for many decades, and then the last is the role of the state policymakers and also local government and how they can help us with these issues that we are facing also. I'll start with the threat segment. So I'm just going to touch on high level categories, and then hopefully we'll generate some questions. The one thing that always people ask me what keeps you awake at night is the cybersecurity and the security of all those devices that we are putting and technology that we're introducing to our utilities, and how we best protect from attacks and taking over some of the systems and damaging our reliability and resiliency and everything we plan. But I think one of the questions that I saw in the chat was, what are you doing to make sure that you can operate the system without having technology at your fingertip? And something that we are planning, we are training, and we are making sure that we have not only a very robust protection system and backup systems that we could operate the grid with, but we also are looking at something catastrophic where we don't have technology to operate, and how is that going to look like when it comes to having eyes and resources on the ground to operate the system and bring the system back up. So something to think about, and we can answer some of the specific questions. So that's number one on our priority, to make sure our reliability and resiliency is always coupled with strategy to make sure we protect the cyber assets we have, and then also plan for the worst scenario and hope we never exercise it, but we always want to be ready for that. The second thing is our utilities, our specific utility is over 100 years old, and we have systems that have been on the ground or operating for many decades. We had pipe systems that have been installed 100 years ago, and we are aggressively going after replacement of these assets that we have. So having a robust renewal project is something that we consider part of our reliability and resiliency, to make sure that we don't leave the assets behind from when it comes to investments and renewal. The second thing is this is a process issue, and every utility has its own way of looking forward in the future, and our IRPs. We are for service utility, and the process for us to make sure not only we are looking 30, 40, 50 years down the road, but we're also looking at a way to connect the dependencies of each of the utilities that we serve, water, wastewater, electric, and gas, and how they are all interconnected with each other as we move forward with technology and the way we serve our customers. So our IRPs, for several years now, we have not only we have our individual forward-looking IRPs for each of the utilities, but we've also connected all four of them together to make sure that we take advantage of the opportunities we have moving forward. We will also want to make sure that we don't create a situation where the reliability of one utility can affect the other. So, and I'm bringing this up because we've seen real life example of how electric system impacted hugely the water system, and how they're or the wastewater system, and how they are connected. The third item on my list of the threats are making sure that when we are doing these IRPs, we have a very thoughtful and very strategically planned transition as we move from fuel sources. So everybody has faced the same issues, but I think one of the threats is to make plans that are not, number one, they're not realistic. Number two, they're encroaching into the reliability question. When we did our IRP, and we had the public, give us feedback on, and one thing we said that it's not open for negotiations is the reliability question. So that is off the table when it comes to, anything that we do. The number one issue that we have is making sure our system is reliable. And then we can talk about resiliency and the backup systems that we have. But we want to make sure that we weren't talking about plans that could encroach into the reliability of our system. So having that conversation when we're transitioning, these are real plans that we put in place, is transition from coal to fast forward the technology of the future, and we can debate on what that looks like. But gas system that we are putting in place is a must, strategic must for us to have a fuel source that is going to take us through these transitions to make sure our reliability, again, it's not only it's kept as is, but improving on the flexibility and the effectiveness of these systems that we're putting in place. So we are going from coal, which is a year away, shutting down one of the plants in downtown Colorado Springs, and then the second coal plant is in 2029. But we are replacing megawatts to megawatts with gas, with the high-tech units that we're putting in, to make sure that when we are switching technologies and we're going into renewables and storage and doing all those things, that we have a very reliable system. The design and things, I think Peter mentioned the way we look at events and the way we learn from them is not a an end to what we learned from the scenarios that we do. I think the evolution of our design standards and making sure that we're planning on substations and steel poles and resilient infrastructure, that evolution of the standards and the design and the research, absorbing the research that's out there, part of that IRP moving forward is such an essential function of us being not only solving the problems that we read about or we see, but also designing for the future. So whether it's severe storms that we would face, whether it's interruption of fuel that we see coming, due to these events, or anything that we are learning, is to make sure our design standard and engineering and construction standards are keeping up with that. And lastly, on this list of threats is the human resource aspect of the transition and how we address these issues. So it is a real issue that instead of talking about human resource strategies, what we did is we incorporated the integrated human resource plan as part of our regular integrated resources plan. So hiring, training, maintaining a high level of skilled workforce, that can do this thing is also a strategic threat for us. And we wanted to make sure that we don't just assume that just happens without really focusing on the way we hire, the way we train, the way we equipped our organization. So that to me is one of the threats as equal as anything that I've mentioned before the list of threats that we talked about. So that's the list of the threats. Moving very quickly on the question of regional grid operation and how we can collaborate with other utilities to make sure that not only we are self-sufficient, we are doing everything I just said within our utilities, but we also are sharing across the lines of responsibility we have, whether it's a public utility, we are a public utility, we have a great network of other public utilities throughout the nation, APPA and LPPC and the forums that we deal with on the public side. We also have a very good relationship with the privately owned utilities and developers and independent producers to make sure that we share these information across the boundaries that we serve. So I think from a regional perspective, our mentality, and I'm sure many other utilities, is we have these agencies that are regulators, the FERC and the NERC and the WEC systems that we belong to. They are giving us guidelines, but that guidelines is being brought from the industry into the guidelines. We see those as minimum standards for us to meet the responsibilities that we have. For us, it's leading the way in making sure to not only to take the lessons learned and apply it ourselves, but should share it across the industry and make sure our regulators, we see them as partners in this thing to make sure they are the platform of where we can have commonalities and make sure that we are all working together. So very, very important, piece of the puzzle that the regional grid operations and the regional compliance mentality kind of feeds into this reliability issue and resiliency that we have. And lastly, the role of the policymakers and how they can play a role in making sure that we all are having that environment where we can share some of the concerns that we have as we move forward. We all have to balance these things when it comes to rates, reliability, and the speed of which we have to go forward. We have our local control of our city elected officials that also act as our board. So we are very efficient government, local government system that actually has the utility as part of that long range planning for the city and the region. And our elected officials also act as our board of directors, and our policies and rate making and investments that we have, they're all part of that decision making as we move forward. But I think we see this as a huge collaborative approach between the local governments and the state government and the legislators to make sure that these are real issues that we have to attack. So whether it's reducing our emissions, we have set a goal of 80% reduction by 2030. That is a huge uplift for us to make sure that we go from where we are with almost half of our generation coming from coal to reducing our footprint by 80% by 2030 is around the corner. And unless we have an open and honest conversation with our local government, with our state partners, this cannot be solved in a silo. It has to be a partnership between all the players, including the utilities and the state agencies and the legislators and the policymakers. I'm just going to bring our own, Governor Polis and our legislator and the way we work with them. It's extremely collaborative. We like the idea of having a two-way conversations and sharing of concerns and making sure that we know where we're going, how and the timing and the way we transition. It's a tailored approach for each of the localities and each of the communities. I think we as a public agencies are very sensitive to the pace and the way we move forward. But I think having said that, that doesn't mean that we want to take a back seat to this. I think as a public agency, we can lead the way in making sure some of these policies are done properly, are done in a timely fashion, whether it's electric vehicles, infrastructure, whether it's cybersecurity practices that we have, training that we can bring to bear, when it comes to lessons learned and the organizational effectiveness that we could show how an organization as large as ours can move very quickly into these areas where policy directions and the cover that we get from the direction that we get from the state and the local governments gives us that runway for us to get those things done. So I'm sorry I didn't have a PowerPoint, but I just wanted to kind of make those three categories of conversations, and hopefully we can answer some more questions from the audience. That's the end of my conversation, Daniel.
Great, thank you, Aram. That was really fascinating, really interesting how you're approaching these issues at CSU. And I'm going to echo one of the questions. We're just going to jump into the Q&A here so we can get as much out of it as possible. But I'm going to echo a question that came up in the chat that I was interested in, which is the sort of combining your IRPs and connecting them between the different systems in order to account for some of the interdependencies. And somebody was interested in how you factor in the secondary sort of impacts from those by connecting your IRPs. If one system or one facility goes down for some reason, how you factor in the sort of secondary impacts from that.
So these are all intersection of the dependencies. So I'll just take, for example, water and power systems, and I say water, including the wastewater that we serve these facilities. So making sure that the priority is given not only for the reliability of our system as a whole, but we have secondary systems, whether it's a local generators that we have that will be totally maintained and controlled and backed up, in case we have a disturbance in our system. We're looking at microgrids as part of that solution to make sure that we have that secondary reliability. But we also have on the gas side, for example, we have a secondary system that could generate natural gas by we have 100,000 gallon facility having propane stored in there that we could generate natural gas from those propane sources into our system. So I think Peter mentioned or somebody else mentioned the reliability of the supply of the fuel lines coming in. So those are all hedges that we have in place to make sure our system is benefiting from having a secondary system within our territory that we could activate in case we have an N-1, N-2 sort of failure in our system, and we could activate those things and make sure we are totally taking care of all the other utilities. So having that view of IRPs is, I think, the planning process that happened before, it was sort of independent from each other, having a path to electric, having a path to water, having a path to wastewater, and now the conversation is not only moving forward together, but we're also looking at each other's needs and making sure that electric takes care of the water system and the wastewater system. Gas can do a backup system for the generators that we have, and those are the conversations that are going on right now.
Great, thanks. I'm going to ask our other two presenters, Darlene and Peter, to turn on their cameras at this point for this section. Darlene, I'm going to ask you if you could talk a little bit, obviously going from a municipal utility or a vertically integrated utility to the market perspective. What are some of the market mechanisms that PJM looks at to try to incentivize resilient investments, and how much of that is the market, how much should be state policy?
Right. That's a really good question. I'll start first with, what we've done, right? One of the things we put in maybe 4-ish or plus 3 years ago was capacity performance in our capacity market. And that is really a mechanism that that really assures that capacity is going to be online when needed and when called. So if you're going to participate in the capacity market and be a capacity and get the capacity performance payment, then you'll do extra things. You'll do the winterization. You'll do all of the checkpoints and checklists to make sure that when we actually need you during those emergency scenarios, that you're actually able to respond. So that's the first thing. The other thing that we're starting to think through from a market's perspective is what market products might we introduce to help answer this resilience question. Should we have additional ancillary services? Should we carry additional reserves? All of those types of questions with respect to how we procure energy and what types of services should we be thinking about in the future, we are studying now. We're also considering, we did a fuel security analysis several years ago that assessed, our portfolio, the reliability or the resilience of our portfolio during a 14-day extreme winter event, and how we might perform. We continue to do that and to understand, to see whether or not we should put in some minimum requirements to even participate in our capacity market. So we're thinking about those things now.
Great, thank you so much. That was very informative. And I'm going to get one more question in here for Peter. I'm going to sort of pull a couple questions together. There is this, to your point, the sort of focus of your presentation, the ways of factoring in the economic costs and sort of broader societal costs of longer duration outages. From your perspective, what is needed to help utilities, market operators, the electric industry generally, in order to factor in and value that resilience? Is there some sort of national standard or something like that that could help? Anyways, I'll leave that sort of as the final, what do you think is a good pathway on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think just a couple of random thoughts. So the first is that, it's clear to us that investments in resilience have what we call public good qualities, meaning third parties get benefits beyond the ratepayers. And so ratepayers are, there's a constant struggle. How do you balance reliability with cost? There's no such thing as perfect reliability, because it would be infinitely costly to make a system perfectly reliability. And the same is true for resilience. But it's clear with some of these bigger investments in resilience, there are these other benefits, maybe national security benefits, benefits that go out, for example, in Texas, that power outage impacted more than just ratepayers in Texas. It impacted businesses in the Midwest. And so the way we're starting to think about this is encouraging utilities and regulators and lawmakers to think about the issue more holistically so that there are benefits that go beyond the ratepayers, and then come up with business models that combine taxpayer funds with ratepayer funds to make these investments. And you could think of it like this, that these other societal benefits that an investment like a new substation might provide, these other societal benefits, if you can put a dollar value on those, then that potentially could be the amount that's allocated from taxpayers to help stand up an investment like that. But that's kind of how we're starting to think about it. It's a very complicated question, but we're encouraging regulators and policymakers to start thinking about these economic issues more seriously, and then really including these in future decisions around reliability and resilience. So that's all I have to say.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. Unfortunately, that's gone beyond what the time we've allocated, so I appreciate your patience and you sticking with us. I'd like to thank all of our speakers once again. It's always nice to have so much expertise on one panel and so many varied perspectives coming at the issue. Is very informative, so thanks all of you. Of course, thanks to all of our attendees for participating. As a reminder, a recording of the webinar will be, and presentation slides will be available shortly. Our next NRI webinar will be in a few weeks on May 20th. We're going to look at workforce issues in the agriculture industry and some of the state and federal initiatives to address those. To register or find out more information, please visit ncsl.org or send Kristen Hildreth an email. Thank you for your continued interest and support at NCSL, and have a great day. Thanks, everyone.